My name is Jenna Calloway, and at 32 I had built something I was genuinely proud of. My architectural photography business had grown from a side passion into a fully booked studio with clients across 3 states. And the mountain house I purchased 2 years ago, a weathered craftsman cabin in the Blue Ridge foothills that I had spent 14 months renovating almost entirely by hand, had become both my sanctuary and the physical proof of everything I had worked for. When I called my aunt on a Tuesday evening to say I was already picking out what to wear for my brother's big celebration that coming Saturday, the pause that followed told me everything had already gone wrong before she said a single word. "Jenna," she said slowly, her voice careful the way people get when they are about to deliver news they do not want to deliver. "Sweetheart, the party was last weekend." I laughed. I actually laughed because it made no sense. "What are you talking about? The celebration is this Saturday." Marcus told me the date himself. Another silence, longer this time. "No, honey. It was last Saturday. We were all there. I assumed you had decided not to come." The room did not spin exactly, but something shifted. The kind of shift you feel in your chest before your brain has fully processed the information. I told her I would call her back and sat down on my kitchen floor, still holding my phone, trying to figure out how I had somehow missed my own brother's PhD graduation party. Marcus and I had always been close in the particular way that siblings get close when they grow up with parents who love them but are perpetually elsewhere. Our father was a structural engineer who traveled 9 months out of every year, and our mother taught night classes at a community college while running a bookkeeping business out of our garage. They were good parents, attentive and warm in the hours they were present, but the hours were often few. What that meant practically was that Marcus, 4 years older, became my default person. He was the one who taught me to drive in an empty church parking lot on a Saturday morning when I was 15. He was the one who drove through a snowstorm to bring me ibuprofen and soup when I had mono junior year of college. When my first serious relationship ended badly, he sat on my apartment floor with me for 4 hours without once suggesting I should feel anything other than what I felt. We were not unusual siblings. We were simply honest about needing each other in a way some people find uncomfortable. Diana came into Marcus's life when he was 29 and deep into his doctoral program in environmental science. He called me the evening of their 3rd date sounding more animated than I had heard him in years, and I was genuinely happy for him. He had dated before, but none of those women had ever made him sound like himself, only better. When I met her at a dinner 6 weeks later, I tried to ignore the way her smile did not quite reach her eyes when she looked at me. She was sharp and pretty and clearly intelligent, and she handled our parents with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years making good impressions. But when Marcus stepped away from the table and we were briefly alone, she looked at me with an expression I could not fully name and said, "He really does tell you everything, doesn't he?" It was not a question. I told myself I was being oversensitive. New relationships require adjustment. She would settle in. She did not settle in so much as she slowly rearranged things around herself. It happened gradually enough that I kept rewriting the story in my head, finding charitable explanations for each incident. Marcus stopped initiating our Sunday afternoon calls and started letting them go an hour without responding. Plans we had made months in advance would get quietly canceled a week before. Diana had work obligations. Diana's family was in town. Diana needed his help with something urgent. I started hearing about my own family's plans secondhand, through my mother or a cousin, rather than from Marcus directly. Messages I sent suggesting we grab coffee or dinner during his semester breaks went unanswered for days and then received brief, apologetic replies that never converted to actual plans. When I visited them at their apartment in Chapel Hill 18 months into their relationship, Diana made a comment about my work that lodged itself somewhere I could not ignore. I had just signed a contract with a boutique hotel group to photograph 4 properties across the Southeast, which was the largest commission of my career to that point. Marcus was genuinely excited and asked to see the proposal I had put together. "That sounds like a really fun project," Diana said, emphasizing fun just slightly. "It must be nice to do something creative that does not require, like, years of specialized training." She smiled immediately after, as if softening the sentence, but the sentence had already landed. Marcus did not seem to notice, or chose not to. When he called 8 months later to tell me he had passed his dissertation defense, I cried actual tears. 6 years of work, of sacrificing a normal income and a stable routine, had led to this. I told him I was more proud of him than I had ever been of anyone in my life. We stayed on the phone for 2 hours that night the way we used to, talking about nothing and everything, and for a while, it felt like the distance of the past year had simply evaporated. He mentioned Diana was planning a celebration party and that it would likely be in the spring, once his committee paperwork cleared. He said he would keep me posted on the date. He did not keep me posted. What happened instead, as I would piece together much later, was that Diana sent an event invitation through an online service to an email address I had stopped using 8 months earlier when I switched to a new domain for my business. I had updated my contact information with everyone I could think of. I had even mentioned it to Marcus directly when he and I were on a call. Whether he forgot to tell Diana or she simply chose to file it away is something I still do not know with certainty. What I do know is that the invitation went to an inbox I never checked, and when the venue changed and the date shifted 3 weeks earlier than originally discussed, the updated information went to the same invisible address. In the weeks leading up to what I believed was the celebration, my family had gone unusually quiet. My mother's texts became brief and oddly impersonal. My cousin, who usually called me every other week to complain about her job, went silent. I attributed it to everyone being busy with preparations and focused instead on what I was planning to bring. A framed panoramic photograph I had taken of the mountain summit near my cabin at sunrise. The kind of image that takes 3 separate trips and a 4 a.m. alarm to capture, printed on archival paper and custom framed in reclaimed wood. The night I called my aunt was a Tuesday. What I had believed was the celebration Saturday was, in fact, the Saturday after the actual event. My brother had already received his degree. His family and friends had already raised glasses in his honor. And as I discovered when I opened Instagram 20 minutes after hanging up with my aunt, Diana had already posted 43 photographs from a party I had never been told was happening. There was Marcus in a blue blazer I had never seen, looking happier than I had seen him in years. There were my parents on either side of him, my mother holding a banner that read Dr. Marcus Calloway in gold letters. There were cousins who had flown in from Portland and Houston. There was Marcus's college roommate who I had always liked. There was Diana's entire family taking up 3 long tables, and in the center of the final photograph, there was Diana herself with her left hand extended toward the camera, a ring catching the light. They had gotten engaged at the party. I sat with my phone in my lap for a long time. The photograph I had made for my brother was leaning against the wall behind me, still wrapped. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. "Mom," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. "When was Marcus's party?" A pause. The same kind of pause my aunt had given me. "Last Saturday, honey. Wasn't it a beautiful evening? The venue Diana chose was just gorgeous." I wasn't there. Another pause, longer. "We thought you decided not to come. When you never responded to the invitation." I never received an invitation. Deanna sent it weeks ago through that event website. She showed me she had your address. She had my old address. The one I stopped using almost a year ago. The one I told Marcus about when I changed over. A silence that felt like it contained many smaller silences inside it. "We assumed," my mother finally said. And the word assumed landed the way a door closing quietly is somehow worse than one slamming. "We thought maybe you were overwhelmed with work. Or maybe you and Diana had had a disagreement we didn't know about. You assumed I would miss my own brother's PhD graduation without a single phone call to find out why." She didn't answer that directly. She said something about family coming together and how we should focus on the joyful news of the engagement. I hung up and sat on my kitchen floor again, though I didn't remember getting there. I called Marcus. His voicemail picked up immediately. He was apparently in Savannah for a few days with Diana celebrating the engagement. I left a message with my voice under careful control asking him to call me as soon as he could. I spent the next hour going through the photos online methodically, the way you do when you cannot stop touching something that hurts. One image stopped me longer than the others. Diana at a high-top table surrounded by 6 of her closest friends and several women I did not recognize. My cousin had posted it with the caption, "S.O. Happy for this crew and this beautiful family." My cousin. Someone who had known me since we were both in diapers. I called her. She answered immediately. "Jenna, I've been wanting to call you all week. Were you there?" A beat. "Yes. I thought you knew you weren't coming. Diana told everyone back in March that you were going through a busy season at work and probably wouldn't be able to make it regardless of the date." She said that in March, before invitations even went out. Silence. She told the family before the party was even planned that I probably wouldn't come. "I'm so sorry," my cousin said. And the genuine distress in her voice was almost worse than anger would have been. "I should have called you directly. I kept thinking someone else had checked in with you." I thanked her and sat with that for a long time. Marcus called back the following morning. He sounded cheerful in the way people sound when they are bracing for a conversation they already know is going to be difficult. "Hey, how are you doing? Did you get my text about the engagement? Diana and I are so. Why wasn't I at your party, Marcus?" A silence. Then, quietly, "We thought you weren't coming. Did you call me to find out?" Diana said she'd heard back from most people and that you'd mentioned being slammed with a project. Did you call me? Did you text me? Did you personally reach out to your sister to find out why she wasn't responding to your graduation party invitation? The silence that followed was a different kind. Heavy and honest. "No," he said finally. "I didn't. I need you to understand what that means. You turned in your dissertation. You got your degree. You got engaged. All of it happened, and I was sitting in my house that Saturday not even knowing it was the day. Lauren," he used the wrong name, caught himself. "Jenna, I'm sorry. I truly am. But the communication got complicated. And whose fault was the communication?" He didn't answer. I told him I needed time and ended the call. That afternoon, my mother called twice. My father called once and left a voicemail that used the phrase, "moving forward 4 times in 90 seconds. My aunt called to check on me and, unlike everyone else, did not once suggest that I should be thinking about forgiveness timelines. "Did you know?" I asked her. "Not until I arrived at the party and realized you weren't there," she said. "I asked your mother and she said you had been told. I should have called you that night. I didn't, and I've been angry at myself about it ever since." Her honesty cost her something and she offered it anyway, which is the difference between an apology and an excuse. 6 weeks passed. I went back to work. I let my therapist, a woman I had been seeing since a difficult year in my late 20s, help me map the geography of what I was feeling. She identified the pattern the way a good therapist does. Not dramatically, just clearly. The graduation party was not a single incident. It was the visible tip of something that had been building for years. The canceled plans, the secondhand information, the way I had been quietly written out of the conversation of my brother's daily life. Diana had not done this entirely alone. Marcus had let it happen because letting it happen was easier than the alternative. "What do you want from him going forward?" my therapist asked me. I thought about it for a long time. "I want him back," I said. The real version, not the one that needs her permission to be my brother. That version may not be available right now. I know. I was in my mountain house on a Saturday in October, eating breakfast on the porch and watching the fog lift off the ridge when Marcus called again. He sounded different this time, careful and subdued in a way that did not feel like performance. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he started. "Good," I said. "You were right. I didn't call. I didn't check. And the honest answer is that part of me was relieved that you weren't coming. Because Diana and I had been fighting about my relationship with you for months, and having you there felt like it would make everything more complicated." He stopped. "That is not something a good brother does." "No," I agreed. "It isn't. I'm sorry, Jenna. I'm not asking you to be over it. I just wanted you to hear that." We talked for a while after that. Not about the party, but about other things. Careful things. I did not tell him everything was fine because it was not. But I did not hang up. That felt like enough for the moment. Then he said, Actually, there was something else I wanted to ask you about. I waited. Deanna and I never really did a proper honeymoon phase after the engagement, with everything going on with the move and the new position starting. We were thinking about doing a long weekend somewhere special before the holidays. He paused. Your mountain house kept coming up. The photos you posted last fall? Everyone says it's incredible. We were thinking maybe the weekend after Thanksgiving if you weren't using it. Diana has this whole vision for how she'd set it up. I put my coffee mug down very carefully. Diana has a vision, I repeated. She's been looking at photos online and she thinks the light through those east-facing windows would be perfect for Marcus. He stopped. You want to borrow the property I spent 14 months renovating with my own hands to celebrate an engagement that I was not invited to witness. The silence was long and specific. When you say it like that, how else should I say it? We would take good care of it. We'd cover any costs. It's not about costs. It's about the fact that I built that place, that it is mine, and that you are asking me to hand it over to celebrate something you made sure I was not part of. I kept my voice level the way I had practiced. The answer is no. Jenna, no, Marcus. I'm not doing it. Find somewhere else. He was quiet for a moment. Then, in a voice that carried a faint edge, Diana is going to be really hurt. I almost laughed. She'll be all right. He hung up shortly after. Within 20 minutes, my phone was ringing with my mother's name on the screen. Your brother just called me, she started. I know why. Jenna, this is getting out of hand. You cannot keep punishing everyone indefinitely. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm making a decision about my own property. It would mean so much to them. A simple gesture like this could go a long way toward what, Mom? Toward them feeling like everything is fine? Everything is not fine. I missed his graduation. I missed the engagement. I found out from Instagram. And now the first substantial request anyone makes of me is to hand over my house so they can have a romantic weekend. I paused. I need you to actually hear how that sounds. A long silence. I hear you, she said finally, and she sounded tired. I just want my family back together. So do I. But that's a longer conversation than the one we're having right now. My father called an hour later. He was less graceful about it, using words like stubborn and petty before I gently ended the call. My cousin reached out to say she understood my position completely. Diana posted a series of photographs of a bed and breakfast in Asheville the following week, and I learned from my cousin that the family gathering in lieu of my mountain house had been held at a hotel event room and that Diana had been vocal about the downgrade. I sent my brother a long email 3 days after the phone call. Not an attack, not a list of grievances, but a clear and specific letter about what had happened, what I understood about the years of accumulated distance, and what I needed from him if we were going to rebuild something honest. I said I was not asking for perfection. I was asking for accountability. I was asking to not be treated like a variable that could be quietly removed when it became inconvenient. I did not hear back for 2 weeks. When he did respond, it was not by email. He showed up at my door on a Sunday morning with 2 cups of coffee from the place in town I had mentioned once 2 years ago that I liked. He remembered the order. I noticed that. We sat on the porch for 3 hours. He told me things he had not said before, that Diana had been threatened by our relationship from almost the beginning, that every time he stood up for me it became a fight that lasted days, that over time he had learned to choose the path that caused the least immediate disruption, which was always the path that did not include me. He said he was ashamed of it. He said he had started seeing a counselor, which I had not expected. She is not easy to be married to, he said quietly, looking out at the ridge. I know, I said, because I had known for years. I'm not using that as an excuse. Good, don't. We did not fix everything that morning. We were not supposed to. But something real happened in those 3 hours. Something that felt like the beginning of an actual negotiation, rather than 2 people waiting for the other to back down. Months passed. I kept my therapy appointments. I leaned on my 2 closest friends, a photographer I had met at a workshop in Portland, and a neighbor who had become one of the steadier presences in my life. More than I ever had before. I let myself grieve the version of my brother I had grown up with, the one who had shown up without being asked. My therapist told me that grief and hope were not opposites, that I could mourn what had been lost and still hold the door open for something new. I began hosting small gatherings at the mountain house again, quiet things, a birthday dinner for my neighbor, a weekend trip with 3 friends from college, an early morning shoot when the first snow of the season came and the ridge looked like something from a painting. I had been afraid that the request to use the house had tainted it somehow, but it had not. It was still mine. That was still true. On a Thursday in early spring, my mother called and asked if we could have lunch. Just the 2 of us, a neutral restaurant, no agenda. When we sat down, she did not start with the wedding or the party or the house. She asked how my business was going and she listened to the answer. Halfway through our food, she put down her fork and said, "I owe you a real apology." I waited. What happened with the party was not just a miscommunication. I knew something was off with how the invitations were handled. I chose not to press it because pressing it meant a confrontation with Diana, and I had watched what happened to your brother every time someone pushed back. I took the easier path, and the easier path was at your expense. She met my eyes. You deserved better than that from me. It was the most honest thing she had said to me in years. I told her so. My father apologized too, though his version was shorter and came wrapped in more qualifications, which was exactly how I expected it to go. I accepted both, because forgiveness was something I had decided I wanted for my own sake, not as permission for anyone else to erase what had happened. The hardest and most important conversation was the final one with my brother, 6 months after he had shown up with coffee. Diana and he had returned from a trip and something between them had shifted. Not broken, but recalibrated. He was quieter about her in the way people get quieter about things they are still working through. He asked if we could start having regular check-ins again. Just us, the way we used to. I need you to actually show up for those, I told him. I know, not when it's convenient. Actually show up. I will. He has so far. The weekly calls do not always last long, but they happen, and when they do, they feel like him. Actual him, not the edited version I had been receiving for 3 years. We talk about his research and my commissions and the book he is reading and the property 2 roads over that I am considering, photographing for a client. We do not always talk about Diana, but when we do, I do not pretend. I tell him what I see with the same honesty I have always offered him, and he listens rather than disappearing. This past fall, I hosted a small dinner at the mountain house. 8 people around a long table I had built myself in the 2nd year of renovations, eating food cooked in the kitchen I had gutted and redesigned from scratch. My brother was there. My parents were there. Both of them trying, which counted for something. My aunt, who had been the first one to tell me the truth that Tuesday evening on the phone, raised a glass and said simply, "To people who do the hard thing." Diana was not there. That particular bridge has longer to go. After everyone left, I sat on the porch in the cold for a long time, watching the tree line go dark against the sky. I thought about what it had taken to build this place, the months of physical work, the decisions made alone, the mornings I had woken up on a cot in an unfinished room and chosen to keep going. And I thought about how the same qualities that built the house had gotten me through the past year. The ability to look at something broken and decide, without sentimentality, what could be saved and what needed to be torn out. I did not miss the version of my family that existed before I found out what had been done. That version had always been partly fiction. What I had now was harder and more real. Relationships with honest terms, with people who had proven, through their actual actions and not their explanations of their actions, that they wanted to be here. Some things are worth more after they break, if the repair is done right. If you have ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect, I would love to hear about it in the comments. You are never alone in that. If this story meant something to you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Like and subscribe if you want to be here for whatever comes next. I will see you in the next one.